excited for our last and certainly not least panel of the topic of a just transition to a clean economy and to clean energy. And we have a very illustrative panel that I'm very excited to introduce. We have Eric Rood. How do you? Rood. That's a rude name. Okay, there you go. The Chief of California Division of Apprenticeship Standards to talk with us about workforce development in this transition, labor laws, prevailing wage, and other issues. Councilmember Katie Valenzuela of Sacramento, our co-chair of elected officials to protect America in California, and Andy Katz, East Bay Municipal Utility District Director, also a co-founder of EOPA and our legal advisor, to talk with us about a groundbreaking project he's working on to retrain oil workers to a clean energy economy. So I'm wondering, Katie, if you could kick us off to share your comments. Up to you. Or either way, yeah. It's, there you go.
Perfect. Okay, great. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here today. I'm sorry to be joining so late. There's many a labor rally and community rally happening in Sacramento today, and we're not done yet. So I'm actually going to have to jet after my comments right now to go make another event. But really excited to be here with everybody, and especially to talk about a just transition for communities, because I think in the end of the day, when we boil down all of the different industry stakeholder groups and utility stakeholder groups, what we really care about most are the communities who have historically been left behind, who have historically been harmed by our decisions, and how do we ensure that the design of those programs is made with them in mind. And with that, the best thing that we can do, that any of us can do, is ensure that those communities have a seat at the table, as the Yurok tribal representatives just mentioned. You know, I have the honor of still doing part-time consulting for groups back home where I'm from in Kern County. I grew up in Oildale, which is an unincorporated town on the north side of Bakersfield. Guess what we do there? We produce a lot of oil and ship it and refine it and do all sorts of things to it. And I think in the end, the solutions that we make have to work for those communities first, or we are going to continue to replicate the mistakes of the past. And I think a great example is actually in the solar examples that Igor was just giving. You know, the credits historically have gone to people who can put solar on their homes, people who have the roofs, who have the ability to finance, who know how to access programs. And we are leaving behind the very people who could benefit from those installations, who could benefit from that more reliable, more affordable power the most. And so how do we design a program that is maybe designed with their needs front and center, and not subsidizing people who don't need that subsidy in order to continue to adopt to cleaner and greener energy? Those are the types of hard questions that I think lie before us, especially when it comes to supporting our workers to ensuring a just transition for those workforces. A lot of my friends back home in Kern County, they're not going to get these offshore wind jobs. You know, they're not going to get the types of opportunities that are happening on the coast and in LA. They are going to continue to be left behind. Kern County's economy is incredibly dependent on oil industry revenue. And so how can we be very deliberate about targeting those benefits, those job training opportunities, those improvements to those communities, as us as local electeds using our privilege and our access to decision makers to ask those questions and to ensure that they have a seat at the table and are doing it first and foremost. I will say that for my work with on the recent setbacks legislation that was passed, you know, the fight will continue, right? We are seeing yet again, a lot of us just finished election season, and we had $7 million spent in the city of Sacramento on one Senate seat this cycle, and guess who was behind it? You know, it's incredible the power and the opportunity that we have as local electeds to ensure that our communities understand why in a region like Sacramento, where there isn't a lot of refining or extraction happening, why it is so important that we are electing people to office that are going to fight these fights at the state capitol, because that is where the fight is going to continue to happen. And then how do we use our voice to counteract the really harmful messaging that this whole special session is around, price gouging of the oil industry, and make sure that our constituents and communities understand what's going on so that they're not falling for signature gatherers saying, hey, sign this petition to lower oil prices, when we know darn well that's not what that petition is about. It's about making sure communities where my nephews live continue to live next to oil, because that's cheaper than moving it away from where they live. So I think for me, the big opportunities on the horizon I hope I'm answering your question more directly, Dominic. I literally was like running over here in a car that my staff was driving from a laundry workers rally, so my head's a little scattered. But I think the big opportunity in what comes to the jobs, there are 3 times as many jobs in oil field remediation than there is in the entire oil extraction sector in California right now. It's really about funding it, ensuring that the job training standard is such that these are labor union organizers who are getting these jobs, that are using those training pipelines and those pre-apprenticeship pipelines to get those workers into those jobs, so fighting for those resources. But even so much at the very local level, when you think about what local electeds can do. Like, I had a gas station owner come to me. He's a young man my age, just got it from his parents, man of color, only thing he owns. He's not a wealthy person. He wanted to put EV charging in his gas station, and I was like, great, that's exactly what we want you to do. And my goodness, did our utility and air district make that impossible. They were going to charge that man $15,000 just to assess if he could get the EV charging, another $10,000 to get the transmission upgraded because it wasn't sufficient. And these are decisions that us at the local level, we have a direct, like, how hard would it be if one of your businesses in your community just cold called and said, I want to install EV charging, and how can we make that pathway easier for them? And how can we align that pathway with the training programs and the pre-apprenticeship programs so that we are helping break that nexus that currently exists between the fossil fuel industry and our economic opportunities in this state. So there's just so much that we can do to really be intentional about that. But I think it only happens when you have local electeds that are asking those questions and partnering with the unions and really building that very intentionally, widget by widget at the local level, so that the state level, when they try to come forward and say, well, you can't mandate that, that's not going to work, we can say, yeah, it does work, because we built the pathway here in my community and we know how it can work to get those people into those jobs. And our work at the local level is so important at this, not to just make sure our constituents are informed, but to make sure we're making those pathways real in the unique way that it makes sense in our cities and counties, so that we can actually use that at the state level through EOPA and other groups to say, yes, it is possible, and this is how it's possible, because we've demonstrated that in our city that we are capable of doing this in a thoughtful way. And here's how the money should trickle down to make sure that that can keep happening. Another big one with building electrification. New buildings, it's really expensive to do building electrification in a real way, especially for communities that don't have updated panels, that don't have upgraded transmission lines, that don't have, the types of infrastructure. I lived in a house here in Sacramento that had knob and tube wiring in it, and I was like, what is knob and tube wiring? And he had to show me part of it, and it would not have supported EV charging or anything I wanted to do in that house. So when we think about these really regressive standards that we're creating on appliance standards or other things like that, we have to be designing the program instead for how do we make this work, and your voices and your advocacy in your communities to say, hey, this is what it would take to do this in my neighborhoods, right? You'd have to have these languages spoken. You'd have to hire these kinds of folks. We'd need this sort of additional support if it was going to work here, so that we don't continue to get undercut by these AstroTurf campaigns from the fossil fuel industry, because we're providing to our advocates and through groups like EOPA that information, those best practices, so that they can design state policy that will support that important work. So I feel like I went all over the place, Dominic. Was that what you wanted me to cover?
That was amazing and very eloquent. And you spoke to financing, and so I know you have to go. Just a question. You talked about who pays for well remediation. It would cost about $9 billion to clean up safely remediate all the wells, but we only have roughly $100 million in the bank. So how do we ensure just payment, and whoever is polluting is paid in that transition?
Yeah, that is the tough question. And I think the Yurok tribe, they said we were familiar with each other and hugged when I came in, because I know them very well, because they use offset credits right now to help finance their land acquisition. And offset credits come from a refinery in Richmond, not to pick on Richmond, buys these credits to say, hey, I'm polluting this extra ton of carbon, but that's okay because I bought this credit.
Oh, you just there you go.
Perfect. Okay. So that means that a refinery in Richmond is buying a credit then is helping finance the projects in Yurok territory, which are wonderful projects. No one says those projects aren't good, but it's directly correlated to them here. I just learned that SMUD does that, actually. Our municipal utility, a public utility, yay, zero carbon goals, the way they're financing that is they're selling credits from their zero emission work into the low carbon fuel standard system. And they're using that money then to pay for work here. But by doing that, they're enabling somebody who isn't reducing emissions somewhere else to buy that credit and continue to pollute in their neighborhood. So I think the way we fund this work is the perennial question, because that is how they continue to justify market mechanisms like cap and trade and low carbon fuel standard is, well, how else are you going to pay for it if you can't do that? And there's some exciting work happening, I know, in San Francisco to fund their building electrification work, but it's going to, again, I think the solution is going to need to come from the local level because it's going to look a little different. I can't do a building carbon tax the way they can in San Francisco because I don't have that many massive buildings here in Sacramento. I have a few, but not a ton that aren't state buildings, so that's not going to work for me here. Is it a wealth tax? Is it, a corporate tax? Is it a gains tax like they're talking about in the Capitol? We've talked about oil severance taxes as a way, because you don't want to depend on oil severance tax. You don't want it to go into the general fund, so you don't want to start paying for schools with that, but you can use it to fund just transition, because in theory, as the revenue declines, hopefully the need for that revenue declines. And so I think that those are just a few of the ideas that I've heard circulating that seem really exciting. I know we've joined, and I say we, when I was working for SEHA, the Environmental Justice Alliance, we joined with SEIU International and others to push for some of those wealth taxes, because we saw that as a more equitable way to generate revenue than depending on the trading systems that we have right now. But we haven't yet cracked that. And I think the oil severance tax proposals are one that I know I'm interested in personally, because if we link it to a transition economy, then again, you're not depending on it for schools and for other things, and you're actually creating a system where when the revenue goes down, as we hope it will, because we hope they're selling less oil, we need it less because we've been using that revenue to fund a transition. So that is one idea for state policy, but there are many others. And I think re-examining subsidies, which I know you and I are probably on different sides of this, and that's totally okay, but re-examining where subsidy goes in our community, we have a lot of money that we're spending through the air boards, through our different air districts, that, is it going to the right places is a real question. When we talk to the utilities, is it going to the right places? Like you have revenue that you're spending. Are your bill credits, are your reduction programs, are your incentives, are they driving the change that we want it to achieve? Because if we're missing the mark and, say, leaving behind certain communities or not achieving the goals, then there's a lot of authority I think we have at the local level and as representatives on regional and state boards to advocate for that money to be spent in a better way.
All right. Thank you so much, Katie. Katie has to run out, but we'll thank you so much, and see you later. We'll next go, and we have an addition to our panel. We'll go to Mayor-elect Devin Murphy of the City of Pinole. Will share some thoughts about just transition in the context of a refinery community and what that means for you.
Who let me go after Katie, who's walking out? Katie,
that's
dropping
the penalty for coming to the panel late. No, just kidding.
I'm just joking.
Go for it.
Well, thank you for having me, and I'm so sorry I'm late. I am so glad to be here, and certainly, for those who don't know me, I'm Devin Murphy, the incoming mayor for the city of Pinole in the Bay Area, right next to our friends in Richmond, and of course Hercules in the back. So super happy to be here, and thankful for really this historic day, this coming in convergence together as we do this in this room, but also as the Capitol makes its tremendous changes. I think this is a huge opportunity for us to think about the advancement of our people. And I always say that no plan has the potential without the right people. And I think that's what made me run for office 2 years ago. I'm actually not from Pinole, California. I'm from San Francisco, California, Bayview, Hunters Point. Many of you may know Bayview because of the Naval Shipyard and the historic toxic waste and really corporate pollution scandal that it has still impacted the Black communities, the brown communities that both exist in the Bayview, but also that have been displaced into other areas, including Contra Costa County and Solano County. And so our opportunity in this moment, in my action and my approach, really comes from both public engagement, but also participatory budgeting. There are so many times where the folks in the room who should be making decisions are not folks who are able to make the decisions in a way that they can understand. What I mean by that is oftentimes we're seen as elected leaders to listen to people through the public comment. We see folks stand up if they're able. Sometimes they're not able to. They have to speak at a podium. They have to, make sure their microphone works. They have to speak into the microphone. And there are barriers right around that. our opportunity in Pinole came this last 2 years where we used the American Rescue Plan Act funding to really stimulate participatory budgeting model. Some of you may have heard of the term the Balancing Act. The Balancing Act is a civic technology tool that allows for people to essentially module themselves as council members and decide how to use their budget, right? So when we talk about financing, when we talk about taxation, when we talk about auditing, when we talk about the opportunities of what people in their own community want their dollars to be used for, participatory budgeting is a model to do that. And in Pinole, we are really, with a small community that we are of 20,000, but the sixth most diverse city in the state of California, we are primed to ensure that the budget is not in the hands of the council. Yes, we approve it, but it truly can be in the hands of the people. And as we think about these decisions that we make around climate action, sustainability, the phase out of what we know as really old technologies, right, our old energy systems, we also want to make sure that people feel empowerment in deciding how their dollars are not just spent, but are utilized and that are embraced and that they can actually be the ambassadors for these type of solutions. So, you know, as a incoming mayor, my hope is to work with, you know, all government agencies, certainly within our own, and it's great to have a colleague here today, and Andy, who's been doing so much work around the Bay Area. Even though he doesn't represent us, I feel like you've taught Pinole so much about water policy, so thank you. But it's truly a opportunity that I feel is really important in these grand conversations around where we want to do with the new solutions, right? And I know we talked, or there was a panelist who spoke about no false solutions. And I think when we think about participatory budgeting, that also brings us closer to fighting against those false solutions that are oftentimes proposed, right? Our communities know the answer. It's time for us to give them both the strength, the courage, and the tools to continue to elevate the right answers.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Devin. And I think that was a good segue as well to Andy, who will share an example of a very practical example of how do you move oil workers once oil, like we know oil is declining in California, whether with or without policy, where are they all going to go? So take it away, Andy.
Thank you. And I'll share two examples, actually, one of which is more of a concept and something that we need to evolve and to be thinking about in the right way. One of the biggest challenges of just transition is what I might theme as connecting the dots. Because I'll give an example of when we have a big societal transition that is not necessarily done just. And I think I would say that was the way our society handled the pandemic. And our pandemic response was we had some high points and we had a lot of chaos. So let's look at, imagine if we had a governmental response that would have been able to keep people safe through the toughest part of the pandemic, both people who would be transitioning to working from a remote place, as well as essential workers. We would have been mass procuring personal protective equipment ahead of all of this. When we would have had a so-called paycheck protection program, we would have had standards for accessing that financing that actually followed the worker, not just gave out funds to businesses that would aggregate payroll and claim the benefits of that program. So I'm just pointing out two examples. There are many, many more of how did our government, as organized as it is, but as disorganized as our politics are, to be ineffective at actually meeting that moment, to be able to comprehensively give effect to what would be a just transition in that kind of context. Thinking about climate, you know, what we have a little bit of time to plan for this, but very little time to actually make this transition in a way where we are still able to have a livable planet for the next generation and the generation after. So what I'm thinking about is I'm at a water and wastewater utility. We employ 2,000 employees. That covers about 1.5 million customers in the East Bay of California. And what we have a lot of pipes. That's pretty much what we do, and I think that's why it's a privilege to be able to focus on this aspect of just transition, because what we do is pipes and some street paving, and those real nuts and bolts aspects of a municipal utility. And what the biggest mismatch that I see in some of the earlier discussions around the environmental community and just transition was matching the emerging amazing technology of rooftop solar or even larger scale distributed solar, and matching that opportunity directly with the prospect of the transition away from fossil fuel in the economy. And while that is happening at the same time, it's not an adequate substitute for a refinery worker who has been accustomed to supporting their family with a near or above six-figure income. Because a lot of those solar jobs are really entry-level jobs. Some of them do include advanced skilled electricians, and some degree of that advanced trade skill work is involved on larger installations, but we don't really see a lot of that highly skilled work there. So those are important jobs, and we need to make sure that we do find where they fit into a just transition, particularly when we're looking at equity, when we're looking at bringing in communities who have been excluded from many different parts of the labor market. How do we bring new opportunities in and provide job training programs? I actually think that we've been doing a pretty good job at creating training opportunities for that sector. But what we need to rise to the challenge of is thinking about where in the state are we going to have displacement from workers who have been engaged in pipe work at refineries, other boiler work, other jobs of similar types of advanced skills, and where do we find a lot of overlap in transferable skills and the kind of livelihood that those jobs are able to deliver? We find it in municipal utilities, not just in special districts, but many cities that don't have the same type of organization that the East Bay does have that in many cities around California and the United States. So that's, I think, where we need to be thinking about how to connect job vacancies in that municipal public works level. Some of it in-house at the city, some of it contracted out through major public works projects that are consistent with California procurement laws, because it is important to do as much as we can in-house and secure job quality that's contracted out. So these are some concepts that I think we need to be thinking about very carefully, and thinking about how do we make this transition actually happen in a smooth way. Not just well, we gave you some training. We said that this application process is open. Because when it comes down to it, that story is not going to sound good. When we want to tell this story, I want to tell it in a way where we said that the government that is responsible for orchestrating this rapid transition to a clean energy economy that is going to transition fossil fuel industries out of our economy, that we can tell the story in a way that says we protected families, we protected workers, we were able to provide this transition in a successful way. And I think the way we do that is thinking very carefully about how do public agencies do hiring. How do we actually look at vacancies, talk with our bargaining units, talk with the unions that know their agencies, the challenges and the opportunities, but think about how do we do hiring preferences in a reasonable but successful way. How do we look at contract procurement in a way that looks at tools that are used, like apprenticeship standards? How do we use tools like bid adders for the value of providing a just transition? And what do we need to do to change state law to make these tools clearly available and easy to use at the municipal level? So these are the questions that I think we need to be asking and searching for solutions for, because when we do this successfully, we're going to build alliances. We're not going to be fighting the same way. We're going to be able to have acceptance of a just transition if we're doing it right. I'm not saying that that would be all. I think there's more to do that makes a complete package. We have legislation that is quite old called the WARN Act when folks are getting laid off from any job. But it only protects people for 60 days. Just ask folks at Twitter that didn't get their notice in time, and they get an extra 60 days because the notice wasn't done properly. But I think this is a transition that can't happen in just 60 days. We're going to have to be thinking about using a tool like that to go at least a year or longer because we need public agencies to be able to plan. So my agency, we need to double the amount of pipes that are getting replaced. There are generations of kicking the can down the road in terms of pipe replacement. And so we're going to be replacing twice as many pipes in terms of miles every year, and we're making that transition. We couldn't just hire dozens of people tomorrow. We need to be able to plan. So if we can find ways to get the industry to work with the government and to be able to provide notification in a cohesive, coherent way, then public agencies can actually do that hiring process smoothly. How long does it take to get a government job? I don't know if any of you have done civil service in the past, but how long, Auditor Wong, does it take? I'd love to hear how that success story of a few weeks. That's a quick in government hiring. So how do we streamline this as best as we can, but also how do we be realistic about the amount of planning it takes to do public budgeting, to create these vacancies and fill them with qualified workers? So we have to be thinking really at that granular level and provide that kind of full service if we're going to do a just transition properly. I think we're going to need some state assistance and federal assistance to fill in gaps where early retirement might be the best solution for some individuals on a voluntary basis, where some supplemental wage replacement is still indicated because of people at a very senior level. So some of this research is underway, but we have a long way to go in terms of really organizing the nuts and bolts of the resources that it's going to take, and the bottom line for what it really means at an individual and human level. So those are my thoughts, and that's what I was really here to talk about. I want to very briefly share a pilot program that we're organizing in the city of Berkeley around electrification in the residential level. The biggest barrier I see, and this is not for necessarily for individuals transitioning out of fossil fuel, but this is really something that I think is a way to create high road jobs out of an industry that's going to the underground economy. So we see, we don't have an example of home energy efficiency high road jobs. It simply doesn't exist, and I'll tell you why. The jobs are really quick. Ripping out your gas heater, your gas water heater, and installing those appliances, it takes half a day or less. So when you look at a union contract, it protects a certain degree of show up time. You're guaranteed a day's work. So what's the solution to this? We need to aggregate the customers, and the local government is able to help bundle customers together through a project administrator or pre-qualified contractors. So this is a model that, as a member of the Berkeley Labor Commission, that I came up with while serving on the steering committee for East Bay Community Energy to launch that program. And now one city in that service area is piloting this concept, and I'm really optimistic that we're going to be able to solve the show-up time problem and overcome that barrier and create those efficiencies that create a breakthrough to make this a way to actually deliver residential home efficiency so that we can help people get off of fossil fuel in their own homes as well as create high-road jobs. So that's what I was very glad to share with you today, and I'm excited to hear what our colleague at the Workforce Apprenticeship Program has to say, too.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy. And that was a great segue as well. You mentioned apprenticeship standards. So the question to Chief Rood is, as we're transitioning from fossil fuels to 100% clean energy, how do we ensure that the workforce is prepared and fairly benefits?
Well, this is really an honor to be here today with such distinguished folks, being able to be here for about an hour or so. What I can say is, let me give you a little hierarchy of the Labor and Workforce Development Agency. I'm a part of the Department of Industrial Relations. I spent 7 years as the Assistant State Labor Commissioner dealing with wage theft. So I saw on-the-ground construction projects. I was an expert witness for district attorneys' offices from Orange County to Alameda to Yolo to San Joaquin, wherever. We put 53 individuals in prison for wage theft, and these were on construction sites, right, that were public works. So these are, owners were cities, counties, special districts, what have you, even state projects. And what we did realize was that there was, a lot of organized crime. That's human trafficking is real on these projects and what have you. Transitioning, I was appointed by Governor Brown to head up the Division of Apprenticeship Standards within the Department of Industrial Relations. We have the Labor Commissioner, we have Cal OSHA for health and safety, and then we have, of course, our workforce, really the only workforce entity within the Department of Industrial Relations. And 1 out of every 8 registered apprentices in the United States are one of my apprentices. And so we have nearly 90,000 registered apprentices statewide. Over 62,000 of them are in the construction industry. So as we're talking about a just transition, and especially oil capping, a lot of work that's going to be going on there is really looking at how do we provide more equity into our programs. Majority of my construction programs, 93%, or have a labor base. So it's a labor management program. And so it's really building pathways through pre-apprenticeships. In 2018, we passed Assembly Bill 235, which provided a registered pre-apprenticeship. And what that is providing folks an opportunity to learn about all the different types of crafts and trades that are out there, whether they're working in the refineries, a lot of steam fitters and pipe fitters and heat and frost installators and electricians and what have you. But they also do work in hospitals and other types of work as well. A lot of Proposition 39 in our schools with the solar. We did a lot of projects there. State law requires that for every 5 hours of a journey level worker, you have to have 1 hour apprentice, regardless of that contractor employs apprentices or not. So I'm the secretary of the California Apprenticeship Council, and we're a rulemaking body that really makes sure that there's opportunities for our apprentices that are registered with our joint programs, and we're really again also looking at how we can affect a better equity outcome. We actually do pretty good when we look at ethnicity and race as it compares to the state population. Where we struggle is gender, and so we just today launched a $25 million grant to offset child care barriers for our MC3 programs and for pre-apprenticeships, as well as our registered apprenticeship programs that take a chance on folks to be able to enter into a registered apprenticeship program. A registered apprenticeship program, it's like a master's degree when we're talking about the trades. My pipe fitter program is a 5-year, that's over 677 hours of classroom instruction and 10,000 hours of on-the-job training. And this is on-the-job training that they're learning from seasoned journey-level workers, and to be able to give them that's the next generation of skilled workers. So when we talk about offshore wind, and we currently, I've already had several conversations with the leadership of the carpenters. They do a lot of pile drivers. They have the folks that actually go down into the waters and do the work, electricians, and of course the State Building Construction Trades Council, and those folks are very important in making sure that we get equity coming through our programs. Carpenters right now, the single biggest supplier of apprentices in California. They have about 13,000 apprentices right now as we speak. So as monies get funneled in from both the federal and state level on infrastructure, these employers that are signatory with the Carpenters Union or other unions as well will expand their apprenticeship workforce. And so again, as we build these big infrastructure projects, it's very important that we are able to draw from our MC3 pipeline pre-apprenticeships. The other big issue that we're really focusing on is youth apprenticeship. And the governor has a call out right now for 500,000 registered apprentices, basically the size of the whole United States system. And what we're looking at is really developing a robust youth apprenticeship. Senator Durazo was a leader this year. We received $65 million to look at how we can start developing apprenticeship programs both in the construction and also in information technology, healthcare, education, early child care, which seems to be a big challenge as well, to really provide folks that have been left behind economically to be able to enter into these programs and make a quality wage. You don't get economic or environmental justice without having economic justice also in the social justice movement. So I think it's very important. We've been aligning really well with our sister department, the California Workforce Development Board, under the Labor and Workforce Development Agency. They actually have funding. A lot of the funding comes from with the environmental funds that are coming in. And we're aligning the work that they're funding as well as developing apprenticeship programs around that as well. So, Dominic, any questions for me?
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Chief. And yeah, let's open it up to questions. I'd love to hear from the audience. Yeah, go for it, Eduardo.
For damages to the community and for cleanup when they eventually close down. So there's a lot of work done in cleaning up the refinery, and they'll take a lot of expertise, a lot of it basically from the people who work there now. So how do we plan to finance that?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of this work, is working in conjunction with our partners with labor and our management partners as we're looking at it. There's I believe funding opportunities when we have cleanup or remedial type of funds. A lot of times it's coming a lot of times from the federal government. Although I can tell you right now the amount of investments in workforce is unprecedented, and the amount of investment this year alone for apprenticeship training it's unprecedented. We received almost $250 million worth of apprenticeship dollars, but most of what my agency does is focused on the workforce element. So as far as holding corporations or others responsible, that's going to be as a result of funding through environmental agencies and what have you, and then when the workers are going in and performing the work, that's where the Department of Industrial Relations will make sure that they're in there, that they're doing it safe, health and safe as part of the Cal OSHA requirements, that they're getting paid a fair day's wage for a good day's work, and of course where there's an opportunity for apprenticeship on-the-job training, we're going to want that.
Wonderful. Other questions?
So I'm on a school board, and I just wonder about just the access to pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship programs for connecting that to high schools, right?
Yeah.
So I think back when last time I looked at this, people were saying like the average age was like 27, 26, and someone got into one of these programs. So what are you doing? What are you doing in terms of trying to connect directly to high school students, right, or even earlier grades?
Great question. So part of Senator Durazo's bill was for me to put together a California Youth Apprenticeship Committee. We're looking at developing definitions about what is youth apprenticeship, what is high school apprenticeship, what is opportunity youth, foster, homeless youth, and so this committee it was very prescriptive in the legislation to include folks that actually both at the high school districts as well as the community colleges, as far as employers that employ youth apprentices and a youth apprentice to be on this committee. We developed the first high school apprenticeship centric in San Joaquin County just recently. It's called ARCH. It's Apprenticeships Reaching Career Horizons. And it was an interesting concept for school, and this is what I'm challenging all the school districts. This was with the County Office of Education there in San Joaquin. They actually developed 2 apprenticeships. One was for information technology, a help desk position, and one was for a teacher's aide. And they hired their own students at Ripon Unified School District and at Linden Unified High School District, as well as the county office hired some apprentices, but they were hiring their own kids in their own community into that apprenticeship program. So that we're looking to try to, we're utilizing, Pam Nieup is the administrator of that program, and we have her on that California Youth Apprenticeship Committee to really evangelize other school districts on how this is very possible to provide. Many times, we're dealing with folks that are coming from, they're not looking for college as the next, and so we need to get good careers where they get the college built into an on-the-job training experience. But thank you. That was a great question.
Great. Hi, I'm Jenny. I'm Jenny the auditor. That's my Twitter handle. As Devin was talking about participatory government or budgeting, which I have a lot of interest in as somebody who works a lot with data and information and engaging the public. And as Andy, you were talking about really thinking through administratively how to work on rolling out some of these things into a realistic implementation phase. My question, and I guess to you, is what information do you think local officials would need to be fully equipped with to progress further on some of these issues? Are there specific, as an auditor, I do deep dives into a lot of different issues, and, are there opportunities that auditors or council members who can, either consult, use consultants on to further some of these issues that we all care about deeply?
Is that a question? Sure, I can touch on that, Andy, if you'd like to. Yeah, that's a great question. So I think first and foremost, we always, I know a lot's moving, right? We're talking about a crisis, the climate crisis, and I think with crises, especially in the United States, we have a sense of moral panic. We oftentimes move because we feel like we have to move for the morality of both our country, our state, and our city. But it's really important in these moments to take a step back for 2 reasons. Number one, there are people who have been in this room before us. There are people who have been in this room before us, and they are our ancestors, and they have done work similar to this. So it's important for us to acknowledge that work and how important that work is to create this moment. And look at that work to identify in what ways those ancestors, right, the people we stand on, have created solutions, right? We talk about food, housing, environment, right? We know that there have been groups and entities and people who have had these solutions and pushed us forward. So that's the first thing. But I also think the second part of this is around values, right? In models around participatory budgeting, it's also really important to have alignment of values, right? It creates expectations of the solutions by which the model creates, right? So identifying the values of why we want folks in our communities to make the decisions. Because many of us in this room are elected officials, right? Some of us may have the value that we were elected to make the budget decisions. Others may not, right? But our identification and alignment of those values is really important in terms of processing, how to move forward, but also in terms of creating understanding of the systems and assets that our agencies have, and teaching about those assets to our people. Again, I come from a very small, a big community in San Francisco, but a small community in Pinole. And as I have represented our city, I have come to understand that that there is a opening, if you will, to how might we create these solutions and how might we develop the values and teach each other and share those values, right? Most folks, see things on the agenda, I've noticed, and then kind of say, well, why is our city doing this? More so than what it is on the agenda. And that says to me that we have to have that conversation up front, right? The values and the approach to change, and really the theory of change that we're doing the work. So I think to just answer your question, I think those two pieces, looking at the history and where we come from, but also making sure we have alignment of values, not in the council, but the alignment of values in the approach of budgeting and participatory budgeting.
I think we're really at the level of talking about a framework. We have not gone, at least specifically with this particular challenge, we have not gone all the way down the road into explaining what all of these rules are. I've identified some questions, and I think it's important for elected officials to engage in these questions, but to understand that we don't have all of the answers. In fact, some of these questions it's critical to be asking the workers who expect a degree of control over how their careers and their organizations, their trades career pathways look. It's also critical to be talking to local communities who haven't had access into these pathways and opportunities, to be thinking about what is social justice, what does that just transition mean for communities that haven't been at the table with the fossil fuel industry and haven't had access historically to those high quality jobs in the past, high quality but polluting jobs in the past. So we have to, I think, be starting with a framework, and that's important because while elected officials can make policy decisions and integrate legislative goals into a policy, when it gets to adoption and then implementation, our bureaucracy, our public works director, my operations and maintenance director, who orders a hiring list and a job examination, we are going to be following very strict rules that have a job description and qualifications and a lot of checking the box. And if the answer to what is the prompt for checking that box is not what we want it to look like, we're not going to see what we're expecting. So it's important to get the framework as comprehensive as we can get, with an expectation that we're going to be having cycles of examining, evaluating, and retooling. But having the initial pilot of these models be as good as it can get, and to have as much consultation and vetting as possible, I think is going to be the way to make sure that in these pilot program jurisdictions, as I'm envisioning, that we get as close as we can to getting the job done well, and that's how I think it gets implemented. So I think that the devil's in the details, to be perfectly colloquial about how to I think auditors who have experience in pitfalls of government hiring, it would be great to learn these sorts of experiences to be able to pool our knowledge.
And I would say also for the governor has this really audacious goal of 500,000 registered apprentices. We can't get there without actually building apprenticeships with our local government, or at all different stages. We created in 2018, Assembly Bill 235 created the Interagency Advisory Committee on Apprenticeship, which is currently it's up to 17 members. A lot of directors from various state departments keep getting added on every year, but it initially started with 12. Started with 2 labor representatives, 2 management representatives, and 2 public representatives who are appointees by the labor secretary. And then we had the 6 leaders of the labor and workforce development departments that were on there. We've since added Department of Social Services, Special Counsel for Developmental Disabilities has been added, Department of Consumer Affairs has been added. And so within that, we've been doing some work with subcommittee work with public sector apprenticeships, and we actually just named our new chair, a lady by the name of Erica Manuel. I don't know if anyone knows Erica Manuel, but she's with the Institute for Local Governments and is leading the way there for us with a lot of the work. I have a team of apprenticeship consultants, and what they do is they go out and when they're developing new apprenticeship programs, whether it's what is the need, right? What is that? Where are you experiencing hiring pains? And then developing a plan, a recruitment, a retention plan that focuses in on the community. And it starts as early, as a high school apprenticeship. In some cases, if that's, if you're dealing with occupations that are 16, 17 years of age or what have you. So I think the support of local electeds is so important. I believe that a registered apprenticeship is a great tool for the next generation of your leaders there in your city, county, special district.
So sorry if I missed the previous, I was in and out. But since we're talking about these apprenticeship, I just want to share in Modesto on the City Council, you probably heard about it, the local hire skilled and trained ordinance that we passed earlier this year. Yeah. I'm very proud of that. We set a threshold, I think, of any contract above $500,000 as a threshold, and then we define the word local as within our county. That's awesome. And then we use the skilled and trained, codified language. And so I was talking to my labor allies in Modesto saying, hey, I have a bunch of friends in local cities, and where do we go next? So my question to you is, have you heard? Are we going to take the show on the road? Is this something we're going to do? I'm sorry if I'm digressing into. Yeah,
the skilled train's a very interesting. I mean, obviously it started in the oil refineries. This goes SB 54 going back over a decade, I believe now. And what that is that a certain percentage of the journey level workers have had to graduate from a registered apprenticeship program. That actually has increased the average age of an apprentice from 27 to like 34, because a lot of our labor unions in the construction, a lot of the laws specific with different types of procurement deliveries that are out there, whether it's a lease back in the school construction or a design build construction or what have you. But it's a very useful tool that what you're getting is a guarantee that the workers that are out there have the skills, they've gone through the rigorous training that it takes. And it helps to know that when we actually have apprentices out there, they're being trained by the best, and you're keeping it local. You're keeping it right in, and one of the things that I see is we have 14 different economic regions in the state of California. So we operate, although we're one massive state, 4th or 5th largest economy in the world. It's like having to deal with 14 different states in that sense. So jobs and apprenticeship are local. And so if you're in Pinole, I mean, you're going to be seeing more of the refinery types of work versus the Central Valley where you may be dealing with the farms or what have you. Or if you get into the, in the Inland Empire, those types of areas. So skilled and trade local hire is very important. Also project labor agreements that have community benefits agreements attached to it. It's a very useful tool to make sure. I would add one other thing is we want to make sure that the contractors not only say that they're going to do it, but that they actually get the outcomes that they say they're going to do. So I'd like to see a little bit more accountability on that end. But all in all, that's I think when we're looking at offshore wind and that type of thing, we really would like to see that ability to use project labor agreements and community benefits agreements that are attached to that. So great work in Modesto.
Wonderful. Any last questions? One last question.
just a comment to you because that is what the CCA, the Clean Power Alliance in LA County, that's what we're doing, right? Any contract that we award to a particular company that's going to build, those mass solar projects in the desert or the windmills, so they have to have the project labor agreement with apprentices program attached, right? And then we have to hook them up with the South Bay Workforce Investment Board that deals with all the high schools and the Camino College, Southwest College, that build those career tech that we're talking about. So you're on the right track. Thank you.
Yeah, no, Chris Cagle and my friends at South Bay and Jan Vogel and all the team. And the funding actually, they get funded by the California Workforce Development Board, and then they work really closely. I just provided a $2 million grant to South Bay to look at 1,500. It was a USDOL grant that we received. They're a sub-grantee, but they're going to establish. I forget what the number is, but there's 1,500 new apprentices with a really a call out for equity. From everything from people with disabilities to justice involved and what have you. But community workforce agreements are great. Yes, Hawthorne, yes. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to our last panel for your amazing insights. It was really great. This does conclude our official portion of our summit. We'll take it for people who would like to stay and join. We'll have our first in-person elected officials to protect California Leadership Council meeting. Because of the pandemic, we haven't actually met in person. So we're really excited. So we'll take maybe a 5-10 minute break, just reconvene in here. It'll be pretty short. And more importantly, we've got dinner tonight from 6 to 9 at the Citizen Hotel, which everyone's welcome to join. So maybe reconvene in 5 to 10 minutes for those that would like to stay. If not, if you have to leave, thanks so much for joining and excited to have spent the day with you.